Welcome back to the Eclectic Collection. Today, episode 27, Wanderlust. So I'm not going to lie, this will probably be a heavy story for some people, a little on the sad side, and it's weird how I got to thinking about it. I blame Kevin, my sound engineer, for noticing a photo that I had taken right after college that was sitting on the wall behind me, that I've taken for granted a million times. And in it are friends of mine that I was very close to and haven't seen in a while, regrettably so. So I guess the first moral of today's story is get in touch with your friends. Don't let time and space and distance get in the way, because you should be able to pick up and leave off with everybody that matters in your life. I always say that. Anyhow, those people in the photo aren't the issue, but by looking at that photo, one of my friends in it made me think of a friend that he had, and just kind of a weird story that went along with it. My very good friend in college was a freshman when I was a senior, and he was a wrestler and an avid rock climber and a track guy, pole vaulter actually. And he was buddies with this other guy that I was quasi-friends with through my friend. And he was also a pole vaulter and a rock climber. He was local, and he was kind of in sort of a plan, if you will, for school, but not terribly so. And he was all right. He didn't really bother us, but he came to the radio station, which we were all a part of for a long time, and he never really committed to much. He wasn't a committal kind of guy. He didn't really stay on 100%. He would have a show. Sometimes he would show up. Sometimes he wouldn't. He would come out with us sometimes not. So I didn't really look for him. And I didn't have terrible warm fuzzies about him. Like, I could tolerate him and deal with him, but he wasn't my speed. And I guess, truth be told, I would have rather him not palled around with my buddy. But, jury was out, so I kind of figured I would deduce what sort of character he was over time. And oh boy, was he a character. After a while, I came to understand that he was kind of an excessive person and yet never committed to anything. So, he drank too much. He smoked too much. He was into drugs. That wasn't our scene. It wasn't our friend group, and it wasn't anything that we wanted to be a part of. So when he would go do those things, he was off on his own with different people, and those people weren't people that I wanted to be friends with. So I didn't see him as often as my friend did, and I was perfectly happy when he wasn't around. But then I started to notice that he would show up on occasion, more often than not, show up at the dorm, show up at the station, come around more often, inviting him to parties and things. And although I had no reservations about my friend never getting into his shenanigans, it just put extra pressure and unnecessary icky on everyone. So we tolerated him more than actually accepting him. And eventually, I would graduate first, and then my buddy would graduate about 3 years later, because he was a freshman and I was a senior. And that guy was in his class. A couple years go by, and we talked about careers and such. And this kid never got one. He never got a job. He never really went into anything. And he kind of just worked odd jobs off and on, sort of hand to mouth to just do whatever he could do or be going wherever he wanted to go or, have whatever experience he wanted. And eventually he wandered out west. And I don't think it was planned, and I think he hitchhiked a lot of the way. And it was just every unsafe thing you could think of together. And that was early 2000s, late 90s, so different era. Now it would be completely not a good idea, but at that time it wasn't a good idea either, but slightly less safety concerning than it is now. And he would ski, and he would do these daredevil type things and put himself in situations where it was maybe like a Diamondback thing, and he wasn't quite that skilled, but he would do it anyway, or he would try to snowboard when he'd never done it before, or put himself in hang gliding situations, or put himself in surfing situations, or whatever he could do that he had never done. And it wasn't about learning and taking the time to do something for fun. It was just jumping in with both feet to the extreme experience. And risk was completely thrown to the wind with caution. So it was a problem. And eventually, he goes to Oregon to ski and climb. And although he had climbed a bit and was a rock climber and had gear and was fairly good at it as far as a hobbyist went, certainly more than the average person just seeing a rock climbing wall or, a place you would go to for fun. He wasn't completely prepared, and I also can't account for what substances may or may not have been involved when he went this time. But he went out, and I believe he got himself into a situation where he was climbing. I don't know, and we'll never know if he fell or lost his footing or how, but he never returns to his campsite that night. And the night turns into a couple of days, turns into a couple of weeks. Next thing I know, there's a search party for him, and I'm reading about it in the local paper about how there's a missing local man in Oregon who's young and recently came out of school and never really committed to any kind of job. The way his parents even described him was that of a lost wanderlust. And I remember thinking how sad that your own mom and dad felt that you were beyond hope of ever catching or focusing onto something that meant something to you. And even though he may have been doing all these extreme things and thought he was having fun, he always seemed like an empty shell to me looking for the next thing. And again, I didn't know him that well, so I don't know why, but I just felt like he never quite had a good footing. Despite his decent life, good upbringing, background, childhood was all intact. Nothing I could see or knew about that was bad. He was provided for. Everything was there. He just seemed like a shell of a person. Later, it would come out, months later, that he had fallen. Sadly, his remains were found. He actually died of hypothermia, but they had to compare remains after a while and found out that it was him. And I believe he was 24 when he died, which is such a waste of a life. He was so young and could have done anything, but he never really opted to do anything despite what he went off to accomplish with climbing or surfing or whatever thing he was into at the time. And it's a shame because nobody really mentions it and it doesn't come up that often, but he left a sad legacy and a short one. I guess the takeaway is most likely that whatever hobbies or things you want to pursue, certainly not an issue, but maybe take the time to actually learn some skills instead of jump in with both feet. And you never know what's going on in somebody's head, so take the time to commit to actually have a conversation with somebody. Or even if you want to be the loner, which is okay too, to spend time alone and maybe learn from an expert and get the skills to understand whatever it is that you want to take part in. I don't fault the extreme sports and things that he wanted to do for his death, although I do think he should have been more prepared and studied on it. But I do feel that because he distanced himself and felt distanced, when you have no connection to anybody or anything and you feel that lost, you're only a few steps away from something bad happening, because you can't really get through this life by yourself, no matter what anybody thinks. There's help all around you, and there's people that do have interest and care. And I think that so much now, especially with isolation and whatnot, people feel alone, and sometimes people want to be alone. And again, that's fine, but there's always a person, an out, a thing, a help, could be anything. It could be a religious avenue. It could be a friend avenue, a family avenue, a work avenue, any kind of support group. And it could just be a fun thing. Maybe you play cards. Maybe you, I don't know, study fencing. Maybe you're into karate. Maybe you race ATVs. I don't know. I've had lots of different, certainly with the students I've had a lot of different interests and hobbies and things I never even heard of or knew were a thing, that are fantastic, that you can go out and in this earth try all that stuff and do all these things. And to that I say, yeah, try everything. Just make sure that you're prepared and capable and studied it or figured it out and have a master to watch. And if not, go find one, especially with the internet. You can get a hold of anything anymore. Just don't try and replicate something that a professional did immediately. I don't think you're quite ready. But the other side of that is just to keep perspective with people and make sure that you're not cutting yourself off from potential friends or support that you need, because you can't really go through everything alone in this world. It's not possible. So, if with that being said, you are not already an eclector, you probably want to join in and be one so you can hear all my crazy stories, and I'm usually at the wrong place at the right time. And if that's the case, then you can tune back into eclecticcollectionpodcast.com or listen on your preferred platform. I'm Terry Tenaglia. Thanks for listening.